Good evening, Flyers fans, and welcome back to the Flyers Face-Off podcast show, where we discuss anything and everything having to do with the Philadelphia Flyers. I am your lovable host, Kevin Fortier. You can follow me on Twitter at KSFortier and follow the show at Flyers Face-Off. All right, it's been an exciting couple of weeks here. The Flyers made some trades to bolster their defense. They signed number 2 center to shore up down the middle. They added several prospects to their cover through the NHL Draft, and they also shored up the Phantoms with bringing in some free agent depth signings. They were especially weak on defense down at the Phantom level, so they brought several guys in the day or two of the free agency opened up, bringing in 7 or 8 new guys to complete what the roster of the Phantoms is going to look like. So before we jump into all that, let's see who we have on the show tonight. First off, I am very happy to finally have my co-host back on the show, Mike Aceto. Mike and I are 2 of the original founders of the show. Mike actually has a life, and he's been a little bit too busy to be on the show up until now. Mike, tell everybody where they can follow you.
Hey, everybody. How's it going tonight? Great to be back, Kevin. Thanks for having me again, and look forward to doing this a lot more with you guys. Everybody can follow me at M Death and Taxes. That's M as in my first name, Mike, and Death and Taxes. And like I said, it's phenomenal to be back. It'll be great to dive into some of these interesting moves that Chuck Fletcher and the Flyers have made in the offseason here, and looking forward to a good show.
All right. And also, we are very pleased to have back our first returning guest, and his name is Yariv Wolok. Yariv, welcome back to the show, and remind everybody where they can follow you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, and Mike. Appreciate it. Happy to be back, for sure, and excited that we have stuff to talk about in the offseason, which is you can find most of my opinions on Twitter. Most of my voice goes through Twitter, and most of my content comes out through Twitter, but also just Philly Sports Network in general, part of the Flyers team over there. So collectively, we all cover the team, but a lot of my big focus right now is video. So you can go to Philly Sports Network's YouTube page, and I have a series called The Flyers Narrative. I'll share that out on Twitter all the time through my opinions and whatnot, but I'll post it on Facebook and everything. But look out for more content there. Just do quick, short series, breakdowns of players and just my thoughts and overall what's going on with the team. And then I'll be writing more articles and in person, in the locker room, press box, stuff like that. As the season rolls on, I'll be covering the team more in person. But yeah, one of my most recent videos is about Ronnie Attard. Then I have a video coming out on Bobby Brink, and then following that on Cam York. So those will be out soon.
Awesome. All right. We got a pretty packed show here, so let's jump right into it. We have discussed some of the moves that the Flyers have made over the course of the past few weeks, so we don't need to go through each minutia level of detail here, but I did want to circle back and look at some of the key moves that the Flyers have made now that it seems like Fletcher's moves are probably done for the most part. Depending on how things shake out, you could potentially see him scooping up an extra forward, but we'll see. I kind of think that he's going to be done for here, and let a couple of the younger players kind of battle out for any remaining spots, particularly on offense. Anyway, the forward groups, they've got carrying 8 defensemen, but let's just kind of take a look at some of these moves and see what their impacts will be, where we see guys being positioned on the roster come training camp, and then what some of the expectations might be for how they're going to perform. Some of the guys coming in from having some down seasons, do we expect that they're going to turn those things around? What might be the key contributors to hoping that they turn things around? So let's take a look at the 2 defensemen that Fletcher brought in. He went out and made the trade with the Caps to bring in Matt Niskanen, replacing Radko Gudas in the lineup, keeping at least at the time the one right-handed shot who was a lock on the defense core. So let's see, Mike, since you haven't been around, where do you see him as far as the pairings? Who do you think he might match up best with, and what do you see as his major focus on the back end?
Sure. So I think that really the addition of Niskanen, and I guess we'll get into Braun as well, but I think overall they are moves that are not really about those players. They're moves about the younger players, because I do not think that the Flyers are going to be really relying on a ton of production out of a guy like Matt Niskanen. Rather, they're focusing on his locker room presence, his hockey smarts on the ice, to kind of help bolster all of the younger players and raise the younger players' game up. As far as Matt Niskanen goes, I think the Flyers' idea is to put him on the top pair as the right-handed defenseman to complement Ivan Provorov, assuming, knock on wood, that they sign him in the next couple of weeks here. But I think that they're going to start Niskanen off there. I think he's going to be playing a lot of minutes to start the season, but with the idea that perhaps some of the younger guys can come up and take some of those minutes away, provided that they are actually taking steps and growing as players.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to be paired with Provorov. He gives them that good breakout, the guy that can carry the puck out of the Flyers, and he's a little bit better at that. Provy is a strong skater, but he's not he's not the quickest, certainly. He still needs to work on his zone exits a little bit, I think. So Niskanen gives them that option and gives them that on the right side as well, so you could potentially get the puck out of the end from either side of the ice. I'm hoping that his presence, and then as well, like you said, Mike, having Braun there, and some of the other younger guys coming on a little better, that they're not going to lean on Provy to have to play 24, 25, 26 minutes a night. Hopefully they'll be able to tamp that down somewhat. If he wants to play 21, 22 minutes a night, fine, but try not to overdo it. Spread the minutes out a little bit, because I think they're going to have three really strong pairings. Yariv, what do you think?
Yeah, I would actually agree with most of what you guys said overall, for sure. But the way I see it, I think it's just like a little different in my mind, the way that they made these moves. And I really take into account the type of contracts that were brought over here. Like, I personally am a big fan of Matt Niskanen. I really like his game. I'm not as thrown off by one season as everybody else is, just because look at the Caps as a whole, and they really weren't as good of a team, especially with a different coach. As they were the year before that. Still a very talented bunch, but I'm sure you could point at a few guys there who didn't have as good of a season as they did the year before, not just Matt Niskanen. So I really do see him as like a big upgrade. Braun, I think I would agree with both of you guys. Locker room presence. That's everything I read about him. I've only seen obviously a little bit of him on TV. I've never really seen the guy in person that often. Don't know what he's like in the locker room, but everything that I read so far seems to be like that's kind of the case. That he's kind of this big go-to guy, at least personality-wise, and same with Matt Niskanen. Niskanen even maybe to a higher degree, and that's probably why he has a ring on top of it. But overall, I think the changes that they made on the back end were showing that, yes, this team is the way you're looking at it going into the season, into training camp. But that's not really the end-all, be-all, and that's not always how the team finishes, right? You took on these type of contracts. Both are pretty short-term, even though you ate some cap space there. They're both short term. So if you want to bring in another guy later on when maybe teams are dumping in cap space, all of a sudden now you have an opportunity because you didn't go out there and lock in a huge monster contract and hamper yourself. You actually have two guys who are, potentially coming off the books within a year, 2 years, right? And they are upgrades. I know most people don't think so, but I see Braun as an upgrade over Gudis, and I see Niskanen as an upgrade over Amac. And I know Amac isn't that guy. He never was that guy. He should have never got $5 million a year. But like we see with Niskanen, that's what a defenseman of that caliber gets paid. So that's the type of guy we need in the top four. So I think the replacements are solid, and I think it should help along. We could have really used them last year. So look at the way the team was structured, the way we barely made it across the finish line with three pairings kind of, and four forward lines kind of, but not really. We didn't even have enough depth. So I think this changes the game a little bit, and I can deal with the loss of cap space for the year.
And I'm sorry, who isn't an upgrade to Amac?
Right, exactly. But that's kind of the point, right? That's kind of the point, is we haven't had that guy, right? So let's I think we should give Fletcher a little bit of a credit. I mean, I thought we were going to go out and get somebody like Strawman, right? Which, in my opinion, is not as good as Niskanen, especially at his age. So, I think he did a pretty good job, and he's a right-handed defender.
Well, I mean, that was this thing that I've been harping on for several years now, is trying to get some more balance on the back end, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they typically have one right shot defenseman on the back end, and the last few years it's been Gudis, who is not a puck mover. Right. He's that typical stay-at-home type of guy, so he didn't really help out from that perspective at all. So I thought it was kind of critical. I was hoping that they were going to go get somebody like Trouba, maybe Barry, or even Miller.
Here's my counter argument to that, though. Here's my counter argument to the Trouba thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm no fool, right? Trouba is an upgrade over what we have on the right side, right? Let's get that out of the way. However, he is in a very similar position as Provorov at an older age, where he's asking for a lot of money and a lot of term. And we have a lot of defensemen to deal with. And I don't know if when we're negotiating with Provorov, we want to bring in a guy like Trouba at the same time and, kind of create a larger mess. That's just something I considered. Where New York, they're in a position, they don't have a core right now. So they're just looking for pieces, right? That's why they could go out and get Trouba and Panarin, because they don't have them. Then, without those guys, they're not a good team. So, I don't know, just something to consider.
Yeah. Okay, so we did touch on Braun a little bit, but so he comes in. Now, I was perfectly fine although I wasn't thinking of Niskanen, and I certainly didn't like the fact that they ate salary from Gudis to get him, because I thought they had the caps over a barrel. The Braun one has made me kind of scratch my head. I mean, they overpaid to get him. I didn't really think that they needed him, but now that they have him, he is a big physical stay-at-home type D-man. He can play on the penalty kill. Is probably going to end up being on the second pair, I would think. Yeah, I really don't see any other option there. I think the question is going to end up being who is on the second pairing on the left side. Is it going to be Sanheim or is it going to be Ghost? I mean, I'm certainly thinking that Ghost is going to have a bounce back season. If he comes into camp and he's performing what he was 2 years ago, where he put up a 60-point season, it's going to be hard for Sanheim to knock him off that spot, I think, and for the Flyers to want to keep him down on the third pair. But I think that they're going to be fairly close. I mean, Sanheim put up 39 points last year. They're both really good second pairing level D-men. They can both skate. They can both put up points. So whoever ends up being that second pair guy, they're going to have in Braun somebody that's going to protect them, to stay back a little bit, let them go take a little bit of risk to push the offense. That's kind of how I'm looking at that. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Justin Braun, kind of like I was saying a couple of minutes ago, I think it's fine if they start him on the second pair on the right side to ease into the season, but they really need one of the other right-handed defensemen to step up into that role fairly quickly in the season. If we get into the second half of the season and Justin Braun is still playing second pair minutes on the right side, I don't think that he's going to give them enough in that role, playing 18, 19 minutes a game. I think that is a little bit beyond his capability at this point. So let's say the Flyers go in with game one in Prague with Braun in the second pair, fine. And let's say that lasts for maybe like a month, and then all of a sudden somebody else like Phil Myers starts to rise up the lineup. I think that if Braun can kind of hand the reins to a guy like Phil Myers sometime in maybe a month or two into the season, that's when things are going to click. And that's when I think that's what I think Chuck Fletcher's hoping happens here, is that Braun provides that presence, kind of not great, not horrible, but eventually you're going to need more production from that slot.
I just wrote an article on Phil Myers, which has been going around, which I'm extremely proud of, I might add. And Yariv and I were saying before the call started, that Myers has been the prospect that I've been more excited about than any other prospect that the Flyers have had for the last few years. I don't have a problem. I certainly don't have a problem with him starting on a third pairing. I think he should do that. And I don't want them to rush him up. I think he could certainly take over that role on his own. I mean, we've seen how, his game has grown, and he's still, he's the youngest of the D prospect, but as long as they don't push him, I think he's going to be fine. He should particular health issues that are going to be, like nagging re-injury type items. So as long as he I think he'll probably get 13, 14 minutes or so on that third pairing to start with, and then move up. Maybe they start giving him a little bit more time responsibility. I think he's going to do well on the PK. He has his stick work is one of the best on the Flyers back end. He's really good. His position play is strong. So to your point, Mike, if Braun is on that second pairing for a while, even if, like you said, if it's the first half of the year or whatever, and then Myers moves up, that's fine. If he drops back down, you're looking at probably between 14 minutes or so on the third pair, 17, 18 minutes on the second pairing. So it's I think it'll work out fine. He'll get to groom his game a little bit more. And to your point about, I would agree. I don't think that Braun can go the whole season playing big minutes, and I think it'll work out great if he slips down, Myers flips up, and then whoever ends up being on that second pair on the left side, I think they're going to have three strong pairs. Really, regardless of how you look at it. Yariv, where do you come in?
Actually, I would agree. Again, I would agree with pretty much everything. Like not everything, but a lot of what you guys just said.
You can agree with everything.
Yeah, I know. Why not? It makes it easy. But overall, even what you said there at the end, Kevin, that there's three strong pairings, and I think that's kind of what's important, right? And that's what I think Phil Myers brings the most. I know we want to start off, we want to say he's third pairing to start the season. Agree with that, right? Bring him in slow. Why not? The D's already pretty young. But I think that's kind of what it creates. Who says by the end of the season that it's not Provorov and Phil Myers' top pairing? That becomes very interesting, right? And that's, I think, ideal in everybody's mind because we see what a guy like Colton Parayko could do, who's 6'5", 220 pounds, right? Scoring goals, skating. The kid is awesome and just won a championship. So is Phil Myers Colton Parayko? I'm not going to put that on him, but he has all the skill set of sticking out. And I said this prior to the show. Look at Thomas Chabot, who was his partner playing for Team Canada. He came in and excelled in the NHL. There's no reason that Phil Myers can't even hit 80% of that, right? 70% of that. And that still makes him a top 4 defender. So I think he has a higher ceiling than that. So I'm with you. I mean, start him off slow and let him take the time away from the veterans. And I do think a big thing to say about Braun, though, to defend him a little bit here, I don't think he was brought in here with the intent of being a second pair guy. I think the Flyers' biggest issue last year, without a doubt, was the penalty kill. And if you look at all three main players that were brought in here, they all addressed the penalty kill. Niskanen, Braun, and Hayes, who I know we'll talk about later, but all three of them were brought in to address the fact that we cannot play well a man down or defensively. We brought in size, strength, and veteran leadership to hopefully compensate for that, right? Maybe it's not the end-all, be-all, but scoring goals wasn't our biggest problem last year. Our team might not be one of the best goal-scoring teams in the league, but they're competent offensively. It's defensively what really hurt our team. So then why not bring a guy so Phil Myers can be brought in slowly on the PK and let Braun drop in front of all those shots. So by the end of the season, Braun is the one kind of maybe playing third pairing and playing a lot of PK time, right? Not much at even strength. And then Phil Myers gets all those minutes and he's healthier. So it's one of those pieces that I think along the season is really smart. And long-term doesn't hurt us with a signing like Braun because, again, he's only here for a year. After that, he's probably not coming back, and it could move him at the trade deadline as well for a second-round pick. That could happen if we're all full and Sam Morin's ready and Haig is still here, and and there's too many heads. These are just assets, right? So it's not like our value disappears. It just kind of ends up in another player. So I think it's interesting, and I like that they're both right-handed and they're both physical. And they both have size, and they're both known for being leaders, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and one more thing to add on to the Phil Myers discussion, too. One thing that sticks out to me with him, and I think that you've also touched on this, Kevin, in some of your analysis, is I think his hockey instincts are excellent. I think the way he understands the defensive game is really, really good in today's league. His gap control is as good as you're going to see of any player on this team, Ivan Provorov included. And I'm not sure why that is, and one thing that I was thinking about is that maybe it's because Phil Myers wasn't exposed to the Andrew McDonald factor, where the other players were. They were kind of poisoned by him to an extent with the, hey, this is the older guy. He's the assistant captain. Do it like him and backpedal when someone's coming into your zone. And I don't see Phil Myers do that. I love the way that he attacks the puck. Sometimes he gets burned, but it's a fun way of playing. And I think he hits way more often than not. And I just love that aspect of his game. So that's one thing to watch as we go into next year.
Yeah, definitely. I got some grief because the last couple of years I've been saying that I saw him as Yariv just said, playing on the top line with Provy. I think, and I've always said I thought he was the more complete defenseman than Sanheim. Sanheim has the better offensive upside potential, but Myers is definitely better defensively, and he's more complete. And I think, and obviously being on the right side would be a perfect top pair. And I agree. His gap, he does really well. He's, as I said a minute ago, his positional play. And the thing is, too, is that when he gets burned, he's got the speed to turn around and catch right back up on the play. So he usually doesn't end up getting beat anyway. Even if somebody gets by him or gets a step on him, he's usually able to turn on the afterburners and get back in there and still manage to use his stick or his body to break up the play. So, and I think that I think it's going to help him a lot that Alain Vigneault called him up and he played for Team Canada because he was on there with Shabbat and with a lot of these other, really good defensemen and playing against a lot of the top players in the world. And if you look, when he first went up, it was obvious because of the injuries. He played the third pair, and then he got kind of pushed back a little bit. But then when they get into the medal games, he started playing more, and he actually played in the final game, in the gold medal game. Both Shabbat and Stetcher only played like 7 or 8 minutes, and Myers I think Myers played 14 or 15 minutes in that game, and he was out there late in the game, and he was out there late in the game in the silver medal, not the silver medal game, the semifinals as well. And I think that's going to really help his confidence coming into camp this year. Hopefully, and we may jump back in on him a little bit at the end. Just really looking forward to seeing what he's going to be able to do. And like I said, I think Ghost is going to turn things around. I think Proby's going to be able to turn it around again, assuming he actually ends up signing. So. That would be the only major hiccup in the Flyers' plans if they somehow can't get him signed. I mean, it's going to happen. It's just McAvoy and Werenski, like nobody wants to go first right now. Nobody wants to be the first guy to sign their RFA deal. And they're all three of them are holding out. It's just going to have to wait and see who ends up going first.
I think there was a tweet today from Bob McKenzie that something along the lines of that he wouldn't expect, or he'd expect that this could take as long as Labor Day for some of these RFAs to get signed, and which I think would be a really interesting thing, because I don't think that's ever really happened in the past, where you're seeing this large contingent of young high-end players wait till basically the last second. I think that's like the day or two before training camp starts. So that would be fairly unprecedented.
Yeah, and I actually have a theory about that. I don't know if this is true, but does it have anything to do with that TV deal that comes in about 2 years from now? I think that's one of the largest problems why the salaries are so inflated, is that there's this big anticipation that the cap is going to go up substantially in a couple of years just because of the amount of money and revenue that's going to come in, and that a lot of these guys are worried that the salaries will jump a higher percentage by then. So it's almost like they're trying to compensate today by hitting their max, right? So in 2 years from now, they kind of have an opportunity to, at least not, still be one of the top paid players in the league. Otherwise, they don't really have that much power because they're still mostly restricted free agents. So
then why not sign a bridge deal? I mean, because I would think that would make total sense, but supposedly
the team won't, right?
I've heard that it's Provy and his agent that are adamantly opposed to doing a bridge deal. That's what I personally. Read.
Well, I wouldn't want to bridge them myself because it would be vastly expensive. And I guess it depends on the amount they're offering on the bridge too, right? If it's a 2-year deal for $5 million, maybe he's not that interested. Maybe he wants a 3-year deal at $8 million, and they're like, no, we're not going to give you, 3 years at $8 million. We'll give you 8 years at $8 million.
He is not worth $8 million. I am sorry.
Well, Panarin's not worth 11.3, and the guy's he's never even been a point per game player, right? And he's a great player. He's elite. Don't get me wrong, but he's not a franchise player. So it's interesting that it's happening. I'm not saying they don't deserve the money, but it's inflated. That's why I'm trying to figure out why it's happening, because it seems like it's kind of throwing things off whack because the cap didn't go up, right? People aren't actually getting paid more money. Claude Giroux worth less than, some of these guys making $12 million or, $11 million. No, not really. I'd rather have G at 8 than Panarin at 11.5.
So the whole point of Provorov signing a long-term deal right now would be he gets the security and the team perhaps gets a little bit of a cost savings as you move forward. And I don't see them meeting any of those terms. It seems like Provorov's agent, who apparently has a reputation as being a huge a-hole, is treating him like, oh, this is the best RFA defenseman out there right now. We need to seek max money like he's an all-star. I don't think that that's really the way to go. There has to be a push and pull, like a give and go here. And if I'm the Flyers, I was trying to think of what terms and salary would make sense for a guy like Provorov, given his first 3 years in the league, including he hasn't looked amazing as a Flyer. He's had some excellent highlights, especially 2 years ago when he, I think, scored 17 goals and looked fairly confident on the defensive end. But last year he really struggled, and that has to factor into what the deal is. So if I'm the Flyers, maybe I'd love to see him 8 years at 6.5, something like that. I think that's fair. What say you guys?
Yariv, go ahead.
Well, listen, yes, as far as what I expected him to get, 8 years, 6.5, I would agree with you. I think the issue here, and Kevin, I think I said this last time I was on the podcast as well, I think it's money up front, just like the problem, that's why Aho got $20 million up front, right? So I think Provorov, just like Nylander, just like all of these young kids, it's not the average cap hit per year that's concerning them. They want cash today. And I think that is kind of the problem. Is I think Provorov probably wants an $8 million to $10 million signing bonus, which would essentially elevate his annual cap hit to be $7.5, $8 million. And I think that's the difference. He's like, I'll take $6 million a year, but I want money up front today. I want to be rich right now. For the 24 minutes a night I play for you guys, I want to be back paid. And I think that's kind of what's coming up here. And I think that's why I'm not as concerned as everybody else, because I just see it as it's a negotiation. It's a tough one, and they have time. So why wouldn't they take it? There's something called Parkinson's law. And the idea is that humans will always take the max amount of time you give them. It is very rare that they will finish things early. In this type of case, I kind of see it going longer. I see, probably Konechny finishing up soon, Aube finishing up soon, and Provorov being the last one that probably gets close to what he wants, I'd imagine.
If you look at, and I've posted a few times about this, the rose-colored glass effect, I honestly, and I've posted several charts that I've pulled that, look at Proby compared to a lot of his peers in his age group on defense. He's not this superstar that the Flyers fans seem to think he is. He doesn't wear a giant S on his chest. Werenski, other than the 17 goals, has outplayed him every year. And if you look at a 2-year, either 2-year periods out of the 3, or you look at all 3 years in total, Werenski overall has outperformed Provorov, and so have most of the other defensemen. They're at least on par or slightly better than he's performed. So he doesn't deserve $8 million. I'm sorry. At the end of prior to last season, the summer that the Caps had just won the Cup, John Carlson signed for $7 million, right? And he was a proven winner. And you're telling me that a year later Provorov deserves $8 million? No, I'm sorry, he does not. It's not. Not even close, if you ask me. 6 to 6.5 is what he deserves based on looking at the stats. You look across. I pulled stats on all of Ekblad, Hanifin, like I said, Werenski, McAvoy. Ghost numbers are better than his across the board. Josh Morrissey. Hampus Lindholm, I think it was. I mean, there's so many. He's great. He was the best Flyers defenseman, but he's not the best defenseman out there. And I think there's only 4 D-men out there making $7 million right now. I think it's just completely unrealistic for them to be pushing for the kind of money that it seems like they're pushing for.
And Kevin, that's why I brought up that TV deal thing, because I think very highly of Provorov. I'm not as much. I don't worry too much about metrics because I see the way that the Flyers have played as a unit, and they have played very poorly defensively. And I'm not just putting on Provorov, just as a group collectively, from the forward to the D. Outside of Sean Couturier, maybe Scott Lawton, most that most of the guys are not very responsible defensively. It's a mess to me personally. So that's why I don't look too much at the numbers. I do see him up there, but I also agree that I don't think Werenski should get $8 million a year. Like, I think that there is a large jump all of a sudden, and they must see something that maybe the average person does not. And it seems like it's a shift in the market that probably is not here today, but is probably coming, where a guy like Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek will be vastly underpaid in a couple of years for their production.
Yeah, that's fair.
And I can see a guy like Provorov. I mean, he chose his agent for a reason, and I can actually see him playing hardball as we get through. You got to think about, where Ivan Provorov came from. He's from Russia, and he came over to the U.S., and I think in Pennsylvania he was playing his pre-junior hockey. I mean, he was living with a billet family there, I guess, or with somebody from the team. I mean, his whole life from a young age was to come over here, play hockey, and make money. He doesn't have, that, super great like Canadian family like a lot of other players have, where they can go home to Toronto and, enjoy their communities there and stuff. I mean, he came from Russia to do this and to make money. So I can see him kind of having a chip on his shoulder as they go through negotiations.
Yeah. All right. So that'll probably be more than enough talk on the back end. Well, all right. So let's just close out really quick. I don't know that I see the Flyers keeping 8 defensemen. I think they're probably going to maybe in a month or so, or from when the season starts. I don't think they necessarily need to make a move right now, but I could certainly see them, whoever ends up being the 8th defenseman, looking at moving that person. Honestly, at this point, I think we've probably seen close to the peak of what Robert Haig can do on the back end. I think he actually had a pretty good season. I know that, there are some stats. I mean, he's not great at zone exits. I know that. From the hitting, the physical play, the block shots, helping in front of the crease and everything on the PK. I think he had a pretty decent season, and he could get a respectable return, and his value is probably not going to get any higher than this. And they got to do something. They've got to figure out what they're going to do with Morin, or however you want to pronounce his name, right? He's been there. Obviously he's been injured, but I mean, he was their first round pick back in 2013. They either need to use him in some capacity or just trade him and get something of value in return for him. I wouldn't mind seeing them trade Haig, keep Morin, and let him be the 7th defenseman, come in. We know there's going to be injuries. He'll get some time. We'll get to see what he can do. Obviously, they'll see him practice and everything, and see if he's going to be somebody that they want to keep around, or if it's time to just move him and get a decent pick or a prospect back for him. Mike, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if the Flyers are going to go into the season here really hoping and praying that a lot of these young players take the next step, then by definition, you have to allow Sam Morin that same respect, and you need to give him an opportunity to play meaningful minutes and to see what you have in him. I mean, I've been saying this for years now. He's been drafted, I don't know how many years ago. You need to give him a shot. They have him for another 2 seasons at $700K a season, which is absolute peanuts. Take a shot on him. Put him in situations and see how he responds. Now's the time to do it, because if you don't do it now, then you're probably not going to have an opportunity later, because the defense will fill out at that point. With respect to Haig, I agree with you, Kevin. I think that his value is actually pretty high. He played a lot of minutes last year, so teams are going to think that he's really good because he played so much time. I think he's an okay defender. I agree with you as well. I don't think he's quite as bad as some people make him out to be. I'd be okay with him staying on the team, but I don't think there's a spot for him given the acquisition of Braun. And you probably could get something for him. Maybe you can trade him and maybe another asset for your third line right wing spot, and get somebody who can actually produce. Maybe you package, Haig in a second or something for, I don't know, XYZ player that actually comes in and contributes. That's where I kind of stand on those two guys, but I agree. I mean, something has to change. You can't go into next season with 8 defensemen right now because it's just not going to work, especially guys like Sam Morin that you're going to need to find out about.
Yeah. So my thought on that is, I think it all depends. Kevin, I think you brought up a good point in the very beginning there. You mentioned they don't have to do anything right now. I think that's kind of how they're just going to play it, right? You have 8 guys. They probably didn't figure out a solution. I bet they already got an offer for Robert Hagg, probably a pretty decent one, right? Like you're saying, a pick, maybe a third-round pick, maybe even a late second-round pick, something like that. I could totally see him being traded. But there's still plenty of summer left. There's time for training, and during training comes injuries, and that's the one thing I think that they would wait to see is what players actually make it to the start of the season. For instance, if we start training camp and one of the defensemen gets injured, and let's say it's potentially long-term, then you don't have to move anybody, and now you need the extra defenseman. Yep. So it all depends. I think they're going to wait. Yeah, I think they're going to wait for now, but I think that the organization probably sees it the way we see it. Sam Morin's a physical freak, personally scouted by Chris Pronger and approved, and I think Chris Pronger is a pretty smart guy, so I have some faith in Morin. I know a lot of people don't really see much in him. I see a guy who doesn't lose battles in front of the net. So that is, again, one of our biggest issues. He is a physical freak. He can skate. I would really like to see what he could do. I think Haig still has potential to get better as far as just being a smarter player. But physically, yeah, I think he is where he is, the skating, the passing. I don't think he'll ever be kind of an all-offensive two-way guy. I think he probably has a little bit more puck-moving ability than he's shown. But overall, I agree. I think he kind of becomes a little more redundant with the players we've acquired. So he seems like the first guy to go, but, we'll see with injuries, right? If somebody breaks down as the season starts, he might not get moved or, just something open. So it's interesting, the team could still change slightly as we approach training camp, even though overall I do agree with the sentiment that you guys put forward.
You don't want to move somebody and then end up having a defenseman get hurt in one of the preseason games or something, and then you end up having to bring somebody up or potentially go pick up somebody's last defenseman just to have somebody to fill out a uniform in case you need him, right? So I think there's no reason to rush. See how Morin looks over the summer, and how he's training and everything. When they come into camp, see what they each do, and then make a decision, or let it go into the beginning of the season a little bit and go from there. So let's talk 2C a little bit, and I don't think we need to rehash everything about Hayes. There's been a lot of discussion about Hayes, and I think everybody knows my view, but let's maybe incorporate how the lines are, how the forward lines are going to look. There's been some interesting takes on Twitter the last few days as far as really, who's going to be on the right side. Obviously, the left wing and then centers are probably locked up on the top on the first 3 lines. I have seen some people throw JVR over on the right side, or Lindblom, which I just think that's kind of silly. Especially there was 1 or 2 people that put Lindblom on the right side on Patrick's line, which I just really disagree with, because he needs as strong of a line as possible, and putting Lindblom on his off wing I really don't think is going to help Nolan Patrick. So I think you want each guy in a place of strength on that line. I anticipate, assuming they don't go out and get anybody else to fill that 3 right wing slot, it's probably going to be, G, Coots, Konechny, JVR, Hayes, and Voracek, and then Lindblom, Patrick, and player to be named later. I'm kind of hoping, OB-Cubel has been somebody that I've been, to see him get a chance to do something. I'm not sure if he's strong enough, going back to what I was just saying a second ago about the line with Patrick, but they don't really have anybody else, right? We'll have to wait and see it has been somewhat interesting. People have said maybe move Jake down on the third line to help give some strength there, and then whoever would have typically come in, and maybe one of the rookies, is say Frost was going to make the team and he would be the third line guy. Instead of putting a rookie there with Patrick and Lindblom, put the rookie on the second line, put Jake down on the third line. That could be interesting. Yariv, how do you see things kind of shaking out?
So overall, I think it's, it makes sense. I think why people start with the combinations we had last year and work off of that. I mean, that makes complete sense to me. However, we have a whole new coaching staff now. I don't anticipate to see the same combinations we saw last year. I actually would be really looking forward, and I don't think Jake belongs on the third line, especially not on this team, just because we don't really have anybody else to kind of take the reins from him. I really see Jake Voracek hopefully moving back up to the first line, and I would really like this team to have a true top line, like a definitive top line, and go back to Giroux, Couturier, and Voracek. That line before it was separated was dominant. Even last year, they had to separate because we just didn't have the balance. And overall, Kevin Hayes might actually bring that. So that's where things get more interesting. Now your middle six forwards, they're really interchangeable, a lot of them, and you can kind of move them around and play around with that group. Even if you throw in somebody like Morgan Frost, Rubtsov, Farabee, I see them having a chance. I think Aube-Kubel will be with the team. Hopefully, will be on the bottom line over like somebody like Pitlick.
Yes.
But obviously, I see him being like a 13th forward, right? I see Pitlick and like Aube-Kubel being like that swing guy coming in at the lineup or call up from injuries. But overall, I think they're going to look for more talent on that right side. I think German Rubtsov is being considered to be taken seriously for third line role. I don't think he's ready for anything above that. Maybe Frost is ready for something above that. But I think it's special teams will come into play there. If they have the opening on the second unit and Frost can get a couple minutes, a minute on a power play a night, that's enough to at least give him a little bit of a look, right? But if he's not going to play power play time, you really don't want him up there. Guman Rubtsov, you can kind of not shove on the power play. He can play more of a two-way game, physical game. He's a little more physical right now. So I could see that being an option. But overall, I do expect new combinations. Like it could end up being Kevin Hayes playing with Claude Giroux and Jacob Voracek or Konechny, right? We really don't know what they're going to be, though I do suspect that it's going to be quite evident to Vigneault who the best players are on this team and who's the most ready. And I think Jake Voracek will be viewed highly by the coaching staff for sure. I think Kevin Hayes will. I think Couturier, JVR. I think the veterans will still matter, and I think they'll build off of that. So that I expect to be like our top six, and then kind of pepper the young guys within there. So Konechny and Patrick and Lindblom, they'll probably rotate into that top six of some sort. So that's where I see it right now. But I really like to see a top line. We haven't had one in a while. We have scoring, right? Like Konechny scores, but a line that really scores every time they're out there. And Couturier, and Voracek have done that in the past. And I think that's how teams like Boston do really well, right? They have that top line. They will put up a goal a night, and then the rest of the team just needs to be solid and contribute. And that way they just keep, rotating. Depth wins.
My dream that I've been saying, and I was kind of hoping for maybe even some of this last year, was having Konechny on a line with Lindblom and Patrick. I just think that would be a blast to watch, and their speed and creativity would be awesome out there. But they just don't have another strong enough guy on the right side. That's been the concern, right? And since they didn't bring somebody in, what are they going to do in that position? And I'm not sure. I mean, if Frost comes in and just blows the doors off in training camp, hey, maybe it happens. Mm-hmm. Maybe they put Konechny down there to give a little bit more stability on that line. And then it would just be so much fun to watch those guys. Yeah, I mean, Knack is going to be on the team, Aube-Kubel, because he would have to clear waivers and they would lose him, so they're not going to send him down. I thought he looked really good actually in the limited time that he had when he was up last year. And somebody posted out on Broad Street or BSH, one of the sites out there, had an article and showed the metrics, and he played solid. He looked good. He wasn't out of position. He skated well. His passing, he was creating some opportunities. I think he could be a solid contributor on that bottom line. and he's got some size too, and he loves to hit. So, and his legs are like freaking tree trunks. I don't know if you've ever seen him, in shorts or something. They posted a picture from the challenge out on the Long Island there a couple of years ago, and I was like, holy crap, that's just deformed. We'll see what shakes out. I'm hoping that they are going to get a couple of young guys to break in. Rubtsov could certainly be on in that role as well. I was going back and forth with somebody last night. They were talking about moving Lawton to wing and putting Rubtsov at center on the fourth line, and I don't think they would do that. I don't think that makes as much sense anyway. But Mike, jump in here.
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty good with however they want to mix and match probably the top six. I'm sure that the coaching staff is going to try different permutations as we go through at least the first part of the season to see what works and what's not working. One thing that I don't want to see is I don't want to see them using some of the fourth line players above their heads in that third line right wing role. Like, I don't really want to see Scott Lawton play third line right wing. I want to see him center the fourth line. I don't want to see Pitlick get elevated or Knack or Raffle. Like, I want to see those guys play where they're supposed to play on the fourth line, and it'd be a pretty damn good fourth line. I think we've seen way too much of the Flyers over the past 5-6 years asking players to play above their heads, and they don't necessarily need to do that anymore. I'd rather them take a shot on one of the young guys and get creative with them, like you guys were saying. I think Yariv had a great idea to make a legitimate top line with Drew, Coots, and Voracek. That's fine. Let's see how that works for a while and give it time. One thing I don't want to see as well is I don't want to see AV kind of treat this team like Hackstall did in terms of like a blender and shaking it up and mixing it up after every single game. Form your lines and see what happens after maybe 5-6 games. Let these guys get some chemistry with each other. Let them adapt to a new style and system of play and see what sticks. And that's fine. I love the idea of Rubtsov coming into the lineup this season. I think because he only played 14 games in Lehigh Valley last year before his injury, and those 14 games were in the beginning of the season, he's probably going to have to start down there again to at least kind of get back up to speed, get his timing back as well. But I could see them bringing in Rubtsov for sure within maybe a month or two if he picks right back up where he left off with. So they have some options, and I think that Fletcher won't be afraid to use those options in terms of young kids. I mean, goalie's a different animal, but we did see one of the first things Chuck did when he came in here was bring Carter Hart up. So that was a big risk. It turned out great, but he's not afraid to put these young players on the roster. So I think he'll carry that mentality over as we get into next season. I think that's pretty exciting.
I think this is the opportunity. The Flyers have a lot of key positions, in a stronger place than they've had for the last few seasons. To your point, Mike, they finally have an actually aggressive, competitive fourth line instead of just a bunch of old has-beens that they throw out there and sometimes play third line minutes. I think this is probably the perfect opportunity for them to slide a couple of young guys in there, because they're going to be stronger across the board in the roster, right? It's, especially, I mean, D's fine, that's locked up, but they brought in the number 2 center that they needed. They've got another year of guys like Lindblom and Konechny and Patrick coming in. Patrick should play better because he's not going to have as much pressure on him. The competition isn't going to be quite as strong as it was with him having to be the 2C the last couple of years, because they just didn't have anybody else. Once they moved G to the wing, you got your top 2 centers playing on the top line, then there was nobody else other than Patrick. He was forced into that role, and I think we saw that it hurt his growth. So this could be the opportunity for a Frost or Farabee to make the roster out of Obi Kubel, Rubtsov. There's guys that young guys that have been there that I think can come in and really shine and get the opportunity that they've been waiting for. So.
Yeah, Kevin, and also speaking of Nolan Patrick, I think that he's really going to benefit this year from having a coach like Alain Vigneault, more of a power, authoritative, established, and highly successful coach in there. I'm not sure that he responded very well to the Dave Hackstall era, and I think honestly, I don't think he responded that well either the Scott Gordon era as well. So I think when you're getting a guy like AV in there, I think it's going to change the way that he views the game, because he's not going to, you saw some clips of him arguing with coaches, a little bit of an attitude in the locker room as things progressed. And there's going to be no tolerance for that with the coaching staff in here. And I think that maybe it's going to put him in his place, so to speak, or maybe give him some better direction and maybe simplify what he needs to do and what he doesn't need to do on the ice. So that's also kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind as we get into next year.
Yeah, shocker, actually having a competent NHL level coach. I mean, who would have thunk it? Okay.
It is kind of an interesting point though there, Kevin. Like, joking aside, I'm a big fan. Listen, I'm okay with the risk on Hackstall. I wasn't really against that, to be honest. He's still not. I don't. You know what I mean? He's kind of a rookie coach. He came in, learned. But it is very interesting. It's been a while since the Flyers had kind of a savvy coach that's been around kind of a while, like since somebody really had somebody like that. And we saw the effect of what a super confident guy can do to a locker room. And if anybody remembers, Claude Giroux seemed to take a big jump when somebody like Laviolette showed up. And I do remember specifically that Laviolette told the world that Claude Giroux was the best player in the world, whether they believed it or not. He had Claude Giroux believe it. And that was really important. And not only that, Jaromir Jagr did that as well. And I think some of these kids could use a little bit of that. Maybe remind them that they were superstars before they showed up here, that they're capable of being that in the NHL. And they might have a different guy in the room, who's kind of been there, who's been beat up by the league before and spit back out and came back on top, or at least, came back with a job again and went to the finals again. These guys who can get back up, it's really nice to see for young guys. I mean, look at Craig Berube, right? Nobody thought he was going to do what he did. He got fired before that without giving, a full look. He's been there before. A lot of these guys, they've been there before. They've lost before. I think that's kind of important. Before you succeed, you usually fail. So
I mean, nobody's more excited than me to have a new coaching staff. So
yeah, I'm right there with you, Kevin. Yeah, I was okay with the Hackstall hiring too, but he just lasted way too long. I mean,
yeah.
You give him a year or two. I was fine with the move. I supported it for sure. First year, okay. Second year, pretty not so okay. Third year, what the hell's going on here? Fourth year, atrocious. But I think if they would have let him go sometime in the third season, I would have been okay with it. But obviously that didn't happen, and he way outstayed his welcome.
All right, so we talked about the defense, we've talked about the forwards. I think mixed in there, we did touch on the penalty kill, which should be a lot better with the new guys that they've got on board. How much of a change there was on the penalty kill when they get rid of Hackstall and brought Gordon in last year, because the first pair that came out on the penalty kill did not include Weiss or Laterra, right? I mean, they went to guys that could actually kill penalties. I mean, and I've been out there raving about, firing LaPerriere. They didn't fire him, but he's going to be doing something different now. But I think a lot of it had to do with Hackstall, too. I mean, he just over-relied on those guys, and they were terrible at what they did. Even without that, I mean, they were twice as good on the PK in the second half of the season as they were in the first half, which wasn't all that difficult. But I think they're going to be even stronger with the new guys, they brought in, especially on defense, and with Kevin Hayes. He should play a big role on the penalty kill as well. So one of the other items I had on the agenda out here was, any potential moves they still might make, maybe bringing in a 3 right wing. But I think they're probably not going to do that at this point. I think they're going to wait and see how things go training camp. And if they're desperate, they got to bring somebody in, they may do that. I think that they're probably done with the roster additions at this point, as far as from outside of the organization. Just to kind of cap that off, you guys feel the same?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see them doing much. I mean, if you look at their cap situation, they don't really have any flexibility given the outstanding contracts for TK and for Provorov. So, I mean, they'll be lucky to get those guys in and have even maybe $1 million left, as some wiggle room as the season goes on, unless they're planning some sort of other trade with perhaps like a Robert Haig to free up a little extra money. I don't see them doing all that much. But we'll see. I mean, you never know. I think Fletcher's always looking for ways to make additions and make the team better. But yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if they make any more news on the trade front.
Yeah, I mean, they've got $13.4 million of cap space. If you assume that Provy signs for 7, say maybe 4.25, 4.5 for Konechny, that's around 11.5. That only gives them about 1.9 of cap space left, and they still need a 12th and 13th forward. So that gives you about $900K per head. So, I mean, there really isn't any, barring, they would have to trade like a Ghost or somebody else. I mean, because Haig is only 1.1 million. So, and whoever they brought back is going to be getting paid too. So they really don't have any cap space left to screw around with. Yariv?
Yeah, I mean, I don't anticipate they'll probably lock anybody up to some kind of contract. I could see a camp invite or two. I'm sure there's some older players that might be able to fit in on the third line there. I don't know if Thomas Vanek, was signed. Actually, I forgot to look it up before this podcast. But, somebody like that caliber of player who maybe was really good back in the day, I could see somebody like that getting a chance, maybe fight for a spot in camp, and, maybe beat out a kid. But I do think the Flyers are pretty confident in their pool of young players. I mean, I definitely saw from a quote from Fletcher and Fleur that they, in the time that they've been in the NHL, neither one of them have ever seen a prospect pool this deep. And that's definitely a quote by both of them. And to be honest with you, I was at Dev Camp, and I've been going pretty much every year, and this is by far the most competitive Dev Camp I've ever seen. I don't know exactly what that means for the NHL level. I don't want to say it translates completely, but I think in their mind that there is one kid in there that is going to make the team out of the camp. Again, Konechny made it pretty early, Provorov, Patrick, a lot of these kids did make it early, and we have a few of them that are on that caliber, at least 2, 2, 3. I think Phil Myers isn't really a rookie, like, traditional rookie. So, there usually is one rookie on the team. So, in my opinion, I think that they pretty much see it that way, and they'll like to bring somebody in as a camp invite. But overall, their biggest focus is signing these 3 RFAs. Aube-Kubel is probably pretty easy to close. He'll be on a 1-year, maybe 2-year deal, most likely 1-year deal fighting for an NHL spot. And then, Konechny and Provorov get locked up, and there goes cap space. For the most part, I would say camp invite or kid, for sure.
Yep. All right. Well, we're right about at that full hour mark. So we're probably good to go. I know we had at the very end of the agenda talking about Phil Myers, but I think we've woven a lot of Phil Myers talk in throughout the podcast. So I think we're good to go. We'll leave something for next week. Any last words from anybody? And as always, just remind people where they can find you, assuming that they actually want to. Yariv.
So my final words is I listen, like I was saying a little while ago to you guys, I listen to everything, or try to read every source in varying degrees, especially Philadelphia's stuff. And I definitely notice, and I know everybody notices, the negativity that has come from this offseason and the series of disappointment I hear from people as they were expecting big name signings. And, I personally did not expect any of that. I got essentially what I expected, just slightly overpaid for Hayes. So I think that the Flyers did fill in the needs that they need to fill. I do not think this team lacked on talent last year to be competitive. So the players we brought in are the right type of players. I think we lack leadership and veteran presence, and people can joke on that. I know we like to make fun of that, but if you look at the Flyers, they're one of the youngest teams in the league. They're actually slowly climbing up to be one of the biggest teams in the league, but they're young and they're one of the least experienced teams in the league. And if you look at the inexperienced teams, they tend to be at the bottom of the league. So we brought in a bunch of experience. That is going to be a huge help for us. So I personally think we are going to be a more competitive team, and I don't think that the Eastern Conference has really gotten better. I think a lot of teams have kind of just made horizontal shifts or readjustments. New Jersey and New York got better, but they weren't very good teams. So, again, I think everybody's kind of even keel. I think there's plenty to be excited about. And the Flyers, again, have an influx of young talent. So I am personally excited, even though a lot of people say that they're really disappointed. I think Chuck Fletcher has made really patient, nice moves that amount to more changes coming as the season evolves, not just blow your load in the beginning of the offseason and then wait. I think he set himself up for success as the season rolls on. especially with depth. Again, that's my thing. I'm more positive. I try to be more positive because, quite frankly, there's no point to assuming that things are going to go wrong all the time. So, Philadelphia atmosphere, though. And overall, you can find more of my stuff, again, on Twitter, on YouTube, under Philly Sports Network, the Flyers narrative. I have a Ronnie Attard video out. I have Bobby Brink and Cam York coming. I also have breakdowns of all of the players within the organization. I go through everybody. I go through my impressions of the offseason a little bit. And I'm going to make one on dev camp impressions and more stuff as the summer rolls on. I'll be tweeting. I'll be writing articles. And follow Pod Street Bullies, the other podcast, OMB podcast, everything. Follow all the writers for PSN because, collectively we managed to cover the entire team from prospects to, to the guys on the team today. So, it's definitely for the whole picture, go to the whole team for sure. And thanks, Kevin. Seriously, appreciate it. Really appreciate the invite. And thank you, Mike. Appreciate both of you guys for inviting me, and happy to come back again and happy to share my thoughts, especially when the season goes on. I'll be really excited to talk about it after we win or lose.
Yeah, well, we are definitely pleased to have you on again, and you do get the award for being the first guy to use the phrase "blow your load" on the podcast.
I'm proud of that one.
What's that, PG-13 maybe? Yeah.
Well, it's the internet, so we can say whatever we want.
It's definitely true.
Mike, wrap us up.
Yeah, sure. So I probably come in. I mean, I definitely see where Yariv is coming from, and I think there's a lot of valid points there. I probably have a little bit, I wouldn't say more of a negative vibe to it, but just a little bit more of a disappointed way of looking at the offseason. I think I was expecting, as a lot of folks were, to see some more of a splash moves that Fletcher was going to do. I don't think Fletcher made stupid moves. I think everything he did was highly calculated, and I see where he is going with it. So I give him credit on that end. But on the other end, it's like you're seeing some of these larger players and more significant players go to some of your divisional rivals, and it's a tough pill to swallow after some of the mediocrity that we've been seeing for the past 5 years or so. And given the cap space that the Flyers had coming in, the prospect pool that they had to draw from, in addition to draft picks, they had a recipe to really make some significant moves, or at least one or two high impact moves. Now, maybe some of the moves that they've done work out that way, but I think I personally was expecting a little bit more of a wow type factor to the offseason here, because it's very rare that these recipes come up where you have all of these assets at your disposal and you can really go in a big time direction. And they didn't really do that. I thought it was strange that Fletcher didn't trade a single prospect this offseason. I think that obviously the Flyers have some great players that are coming up, but if you're really serious about winning with Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek as your franchise cornerstones, you probably should try to supplement them a little bit better than hoping and praying that so many young players really step up this season. So I think that there's a bit of a disconnect on that end. However, on the other hand, it is balanced by a very experienced and winning coaching staff. So we'll see what these coaches can do with these young players. And I think that's where attention is going to focus, to say, okay, we've got all these young guys and we've got some coaches that have seen it all. Let's see if they can work their magic with these guys here. So it'll be interesting to see how it starts out. And yeah, we'll see if the Flyers do anything else to bolster the team as we get into late summer here.
Mike, where can they follow you, just real quick?
Sure, at M Death and Taxes.
All right, so I'm a little bit more, or I at least have been a little bit more on the side with Mike. Although I would have to say that the joy of not coming into the season knowing that Hack Stahl was still going to be the head coach was probably the biggest thing for me. I mean, if he was still, if we were looking at coming into another season with him as the head coach, I was probably done with the Flyers. I mean, I was so disgusted I could barely even watch the Flyers last year until they fired him. I mean, it just had to happen. There was just no other option for me, and just would have shown just a massive middle finger to the fans that they just didn't give a rat's ass about the fans if they had continued that absolute debacle. So I'm super excited about the dream team coming in, the trio of coaches. I've been bitching a lot about the cap. They had a ton of cap space to use. I don't think they managed the cap space very well, tying up $10.625 million this year between Braun and Niskanen, because they also had the $1 million left over for Gudas. I just didn't really make a ton of sense for me. I was looking for the Trouba type that could potentially be a top pairing, or that second pair right hand puck moving defenseman. And the Hayes deal, I think, is fine right now, maybe the next couple of years, but then I think you're going to be right back to the same thing where it's going to be with Jake Voracek, where it was with Andrew McDonald. You're going to have a guy that's not going to be performing up to what he's been getting paid, and he's signed for 7 years. I was pushing for like Kadri, somebody that was going to be more short term, they could have traded for, brought in, is going to be there for a couple of years, and then you had the option for Patrick moving back up, or Frost, or any number of these other young guys. I think it's going to be somewhat of an anchor. You're going to be looking at having your third line center making $7 million into his early 30s, but we'll see what happens. They had to do something, or Flyers fans are just going to be in absolute revolt. We'll see how it goes. They're right back up against the ceiling on the cap again. They don't really have any movement whatsoever. They may have 300 or 400K left over once they get 13 forwards on the team. But I think it is a good chance to have some of the younger guys have the opportunity to come up and solidify a role on the fourth line or that third line right wing slot. And we'll just see how things shake out. It's going to it's a long summer. Injuries, there's all kinds of things that could happen. We'll just keep seeing how things go. We'll get together, we'll hash it out like we always do, and we'll go from there. But for right now, that is it, Flyers fans. You can follow me at KS Fortier. You can follow the show at Flyers Face Off, and we are out. Good night.